The lights of the auditorium were dimmed, but the energy was pulsing, thick and electric, as if history itself was sitting in the front row, waiting to see what would happen. Zohran Mamdani stood backstage, sweating under his neatly pressed blazer, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and old varnished wood wafting from behind the heavy red curtains. His palms were damp, not with fear exactly, but with something deeper, a strange, electric anticipation. This was the night he'd dreamed of since college, standing on stage, facing one of the greats. John Kennedy wasn't just a politician. He was a legacy, a machine, a symbol. And not just any Kennedy. This one was the modern torchbearer, sharp-witted, eloquent, and ruthless when cornered. A man who'd grown up with the weight of a name that could bend institutions and haunt dynasties. The forum was being held at the CUNY Graduate Center in Manhattan, a grand old building with Corinthian columns and creaky floors that whispered of old academic ghosts. The audience was a sea of students, policy wonks, local organizers, and journalists. Everyone here wanted one thing. A spark, a headline, a moment. And Zohran had decided he was going to give them one that he had rehearsed it in his head 100 times. His question, his tone, the pause he would leave after saying Kennedy's name. He didn't want to embarrass the man. He wanted to challenge him, to poke at the contradictions. Kennedy had just finished speaking passionately about bipartisan unity, about pragmatic progress. And Zohran, a New York State assemblyman with roots in organizing and poetry, had had enough of compromise. So when a moderator opened the floor to questions, Zohran stood, straightened his back, and stepped up to the mic. Mr. Kennedy, he began, his voice steady but rising with an unignorable urgency. You talk about unity, about moderation, about reaching across the aisle. But where was that unity when people were being evicted during the pandemic? Where was it when the climate bill was gutted to make room for oil subsidies? Where's your courage now? There was a beat, a breathless silence that could have cracked glass. John Kennedy's eyes narrowed. He was a tall man with silvering hair and the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who had practiced the art of not blinking first. He stepped forward, taking the mic with a controlled smile, the kind politicians were when they're about to bury you in velvet gloves. Assemblyman Mamdani, he said, there's a difference between governing and grandstanding. Perhaps if you spent more time negotiating than interrupting, we might all be a little further along. A polite chuckle rippled through the room. And that's when Zohran felt it, a sharp tug deep in his chest, like regret clawing at the edge of resolve. He had interrupted John Kennedy. And in the seconds that followed, he realized he hadn't prepared for what came next. Because what came next was war. That night, Twitter lit up. Headlines swirled. Progressive firebrand confronts Kennedy. But not all press is good press. Establishment voices painted Zohran as petulant, ungrateful. Cable hosts dissected the moment like a cadaver, gleefully pitting ambition against tradition. Zohran sat in his Harlem apartment alone, scrolling through the reactions. Outside, the city howled like it always did. Sirens, car horns, late-night laughter, and beneath it all, the low hum of a million unseen battles. He hadn't done it for attention. He'd done it because he believed compromise had a cost, and too often it was paid by the poor. Still, the shame crept in. The doubt. Had he overstepped? Across town, in a very different apartment filled with polished furniture and framed photographs of presidential estates, John Kennedy sat nursing a bourbon. Alone, staring at the young man's face on the television screen. He saw something familiar there. A fire he used to have, before deals and dinners and decades in the Senate. But unlike Zohran, Kennedy had learned to bury that fire deep. Their stories, though colliding in that moment, had started worlds apart. Zohran was born in Kampala, Uganda, the son of a poet and a filmmaker. His childhood was filled with protests, art, exile, and dreams of justice. He moved to New York in his teens, carrying his accent like a badge and a burden. He didn't grow up thinking of politics. He thought in verses and rhythms. But the world, relentless as it is, reshaped him. Kennedy, on the other hand, was born into legacy. Grandfather, father, uncles, all with names etched into American history. His was a life of expectations, cameras, and compromise. He knew how to win, how to survive, how to smile through betrayal. And yet both men, decades and ideologies apart, shared a core truth. They couldn't walk away. That week, as headlines raged, Zohran turned to what had always steadied him: community. He returned to the Bronx food pantry he'd helped start. He met with tenants fighting for their buildings. There was a woman, Mrs. Delgado, who had lived in the same apartment for 40 years. The ceiling leaked. The landlord refused repairs. She looked at Zohran like he was still the hopeful poet, and that reminded him why he spoke out. But there was another thread unraveling in his life. Leila, his partner of 5 years. She was a school teacher, quiet, deeply rooted, and weary of politics. "I don't want to lose you to this," she whispered one night as they lay side by side, her head on his chest. "You're always chasing something, Zohran. Sometimes I think you'd rather burn down the house than fix the plumbing." He had no reply. Meanwhile, Kennedy was facing his own ghosts. That same week, his brother, now a media executive, sent him a message: "You're becoming a cliché, John." The old lion snapping at the cub. It stung, because Kennedy had begun to feel it too. The erosion, the disconnect. He'd once believed in radical change, marched with Cesar Chavez, danced in Ghana, and now he negotiated tax credits for clean coal and called it victory. The turning point came at an unexpected place: a memorial service for an old civil rights leader, held in a community church in Brooklyn. Both men were invited to speak. Zohran almost didn't go. Leila had left the night before, suitcase in hand, saying she needed time to remember who she was without being someone's shadow. Kennedy hesitated too. His aides advised against it, but both showed up. The church was packed. Mahogany pews, worn hymnals, the choir humming softly. It was raining outside, and the stained glass windows glowed like watercolor fire. Zohran spoke first. No notes, just heart. "We're not here to mourn," he said, his voice thick but clear. "We're here to remember the cost of silence. This man we honor tonight was jailed 17 times before his voice was heard. What if he had waited for the perfect moment? What if he had deferred to decorum?" He paused, looked straight at Kennedy, who sat in the second pew. "I interrupted someone the other night, and I've been told since that I was rude, that I was young, but I think silence would have been the greater crime." Then he sat down, and the church was still. Kennedy rose slowly, adjusted his cufflinks. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, almost a whisper. "When I was 30, I told myself I would change the system from within. That idealism was something you kept quiet about until the right vote, the right moment. But I look back now, and I wonder how many moments I let slip by." He turned to Zohran. "You reminded me of that." There was no applause, just the quiet sound of rain tapping the stained glass like a clock, trying to wake them both up. That night, they didn't shake hands, didn't trade numbers, but something shifted. Over the next months, Zohran kept organizing. Kennedy pushed through a housing bill he once thought too radical. Their paths crossed again, then again. Once on a panel about restorative justice, once at a rally for displaced tenants. Each time, the tension softened, not into friendship, but into respect. Leila eventually came back, not because Zohran changed who he was, but because he stopped trying to prove himself to everyone else. He learned to pause, to listen. Not every moment needed a microphone. And Kennedy? He started meeting with younger legislators, not to teach, but to learn. In time, no one remembered the interruption as a scandal. It became a story, one that organizers told young people: stand up, even if your voice shakes. Especially then, because sometimes interrupting power is the first step toward transforming it. And sometimes the regret that follows is just the echo of change breaking through. A life lesson lingered, long after the lights dimmed and the audience went home. Courage doesn't always look like a roar. Sometimes it sounds like a question that dares to be asked, even when the world says, sit down. And for both Zohran Mamdani and John Kennedy, that question echoed louder than they ever could have imagined.